Today's episode is sponsored by Burrowbound, creators of fantasy cities for your tabletop RPG campaigns.
They create everything you need to run urban adventures, including maps, music, NPCs, adventure hooks, and much more.
Check out their amazing selection of different cities that they've created based on all sorts of fantasy societies, from human cities, dwarven libraries, and much, much more.
Each of the packages includes all the maps you need, as well as variations on those maps, both interior and exterior maps, as well as art and illustrations for the towns and cities, NPCs, tokens, and everything else that you would need so that you can even play them on your favorite VTT. Best of all, there is a free package that you can check out if you want to get a sample of one of the towns that is available. And the sample package is only 1/8 of the full content available for that city.
They drop new content on a regular basis, so head on over to their Patreon to sign up today.
So check the links below to grab your first city from Burrowbound. And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for GMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are tier ranking the multi-class combinations available to Warlocks in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
We're going to be taking a look at all the possible multi-class combinations of pairing the Warlock with all of the other classes in D&D. If you want to see how we're ranking these in more detail, we do have a video on that right up over there.
We try to consider all pillars of play in the rankings, both combat, exploration, and social interaction, and consider a wide variety of common adventuring scenarios in our rankings. Of course, you may disagree with us because we've got a ton of biases of our own, and that's okay. This is why we've polled our community to find out how they rank the different subclasses, and we'll be sharing the community rankings at the end as well. And feel free to tell us any details that we might have missed in our rankings as well that might change the equation.
There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
The Warlock in 5th edition is a bit of a weird duck, because their packed magic spellcasting does not play well with others. Unlike every other spellcaster in the game, when you multiclass those two spellcasters together, you're going to get some progression to your spell slots. But when you multiclass Warlock with another spellcaster or another class, you don't get to progress. However, you can use your Warlock spell slots interchangeably with your other caster spell slots for the purposes of multiclassing back and forth. As a reminder as well, just because it's come up a few times in the comments on our past videos, you have to make the prerequisites for both your base class and the multiclass you're going into when you multiclass. So for any of these combinations, you need a 13 charisma plus whatever is required of the base class to make that combo work as well. But beyond that, we've got a whole bunch of different choices that we can make along the way. And so as we start with the Artificer, what strikes out to you, Kelly?
Well, the Artificer is interesting because we are getting a half-caster intelligence-based, and then we're getting the Warlock spellcasting with charisma-based. But the first thing that actually stands out as, ooh, is this cool, is that we have both invocations and infusions. And that gives us a lot of options to play with building a character.
Yes, the risk here is going a mile wide but an inch deep. Infusions and invocations both have level prerequisites, which require single class levels in that class. So for multiclassing, yeah, we'll be able to choose from all of the low-level invocations and infusions, but those infusions that require us to be 6th level, 10th level, or even higher, multiclassing delays our access to those, or perhaps even prevents us from ever getting them.
There are some great infusions, though, that we can get at low levels, like the Spell Refueling Ring and the Enhanced Arcane Focus. And there are some infusions we can up our Eldritch Blast with all of those normal ones that we would take with Agonizing Blast or otherwise. And that will actually allow us to be a pretty potent Eldritch Blaster. There are also infusions that might allow us to enhance our armor if we're, say, a Hexblade, or perhaps, I don't know, get magic items that we wouldn't readily have.
Totally, and I think that there's some interesting subclass combinations that we can go over here. Unfortunately, with the Artificer, the Alchemist never excites me. But I do want to look at the Artillerist here, because the Artillerist, interestingly enough, is not a weapon user. It is a spellcaster blaster. And so maybe we can combine the Eldritch Cannon with Eldritch Blast.
The Eldritch Cannon does basically give us an extra Eldritch Blast because it has its Force Blast.
Yes, and it has the flamethrower and the temporary hit points. All of the entries for the Eldritch Cannon refer to your spell attack modifier or your spell save DC. They don't say Artificer spell attack DC and Artificer. Now, I'm going to admit, that's a bit of a shaky rationale. And I think that a lot of DMs would rule that you're using your Artificer spell attack and your Artificer spell DC. But if your DM's willing to work with you on this one, you could put int 13, go Artillerist, and then you've got your little Eldritch Cannon blasting away while you're Eldritch blasting away, and you grab some choice infusions, you take 3 levels of Artificer, Bob's your uncle.
If you are trying to use Arcane Firearm, though, that is actually explicitly for your Artificer spells.
Yes, it is. So you can't add that extra D8 damage onto your Eldritch Blast, which kind of sucks.
So there's some things happening here that I think are worth looking at, but nothing worth writing home about. And that kind of leaves it in a C position for me.
I agree. Artificer's spell list is really easy to load up with buffs, utility, and other spells that don't require you to have a very heavy investment in your intelligence to still get mileage out of the spell casting. So you can still keep your charisma focused, go a Warlock spellcaster, and go to town. Immediately, we also want to think about, are there interesting ways that we can combine the Battlesmith and the Hexblade and do all these interesting melee combatant things? And while I think that there's some possibility here, I think that the problem here is that the Artificer's kind of the go-to if you want to find ways to make attacks using your intelligence, whereas the Hexblade is the find ways to make attacks using your charisma.
Yeah.
So there's an inherent incompatibility here because both directions want to pull you towards one or the other. They don't really offer us a lot in the way of overlapping options. I really wish that there was some sort of Eldritch Machine patron to grease the wheels conceptually between these two.
If you go Fiend, you can be like the Infernal Machine, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, conceptually, there's actually not a lot of pairing here.
Yeah. So I think a C is fair for the Artificer.
As we move on to the Barbarian, I mean, I don't really know how this works. You can't concentrate on spells or cast spells while you're raging. You could be a Hexblade, but Reckless Attack only works on strength-based attacks, so you don't want to be using your charisma. So I'm finding it hard to gel these guys together.
Okay, let's think a little bit outside the box here. We often go to the Hexblade right away with the Warlock.
Yeah.
But the Hexblade came after the Pact of the Blade. Mm-hmm. Before the Hexblade came around, people were experimenting with Pact of the Blade Warlocks that used either dexterity or strength. So, what if we say, all right, we're not going to be a Hexblade at all, but we are going to take the Pact of the Blade, and we're going to go strength and charisma in a split like we're a weird paladin. So, 16 strength, 16 charisma to start. That's fine. That's manageable for most characters. We can still have a good con. We can wear medium armor, because we're getting that from Barbarian, and we can wield a big two-handed sword. We can rage, and we can use Reckless Attack with our Pact weapon, and we can take all those Pact invocations like Eldritch Smite, which we can use our spell slots while we're raging, and all the other Eldritch Pacts. So we're just taking 2 levels of Barbarian.
You can also, there's also invocations that are going to, since we're only taking a couple levels of Barbarian, you can take the Eldritch Invocation to give you multi-attack.
Yep.
You can take the one that is going to add your charisma modifier to damage. Yep. This is a weird case where you're a Warlock that isn't going to use Eldritch Blast. But you know what you could use? Armor of Agathis.
Right, because Armor of Agathis gives you temporary hit points. It lasts for 1 hour, but it doesn't require concentration. So you can cast Armor of Agathis on yourself, give you your toughen yourself up, and if anyone hits you, and it's going to be easy to hit you because you're giving them advantage and have a low AC, they take damage from the spell slot. And we could go the Fiend Patron, because the Fiend Patron, when you kill an enemy, which Barbarians love doing, you get temporary hit points.
So that actually makes you beefier and like
Yeah.
more of a tank. Yeah, you're going to be
Yeah.
pretty easy to hit, but you're also a barbarian.
Yeah.
So you're taking half
So you're
damage.
raging, and not only you're taking the half damage, but you've got all these sources of temporary hit points. Because that's one thing that you notice about the Barbarian is it's actually very hard for Barbarians to get temp HP because they have the resistance to all damage.
Yeah.
So the Fiend Patron in particular is giving us that source of temp HP, and then we're starting the battle off with Armor of Agathis as well. And then, yes, we've got 2 spell slots, so we have 1 extra spell slot to dump into an Eldritch Smite, which knocks somebody prone, does a bunch of extra damage as well. So, and then we have the spell slots for whatever utility we want to use between adventures. This is weird.
It's weird, but like now I'm thinking of other outside the box things. Like Cloak of Flies is an invocation that I rarely would consider taking, but might be cool here. I'm also like, you're gonna, instead of focusing on spells like a normal warlock, you're focusing on stuff that doesn't require concentration and is utility or like bolstering yourself in a weird way.
And you only need to take 2 or 3 levels of Barbarian because we can get the extra attack through the Warlock levels. In fact, what you could do to really grease the wheels of this if you wanted to is you could actually take 6 levels of Warlock so that you've got the basis. Take the 2 levels of Barbarian, and then so by the sweet spot of D&D, you have the full build. Warlock 6, Barbarian 2.
Also, like, this opens it up. Instead of being like, oh, we got to play Hexblade, you can take whatever patron you think is coolest. Like the Fey patron gives you an ability to teleport.
Yep.
And
Misty Escape.
Undead has the form of dread that allows you to
which frightens enemies when you hit them. So I think this is an interesting way of playing a melee warlock that isn't a Hexblade. Is it as good as a Hexblade Paladin? I don't think so.
No.
But if you want to play the off-meta build, this could be a cool option.
I'm gonna give this a B.
Yeah, I'll give it a B.
It's just pushed into the B.
It's very specific. It's a very specific B because obviously if you do any of the other spellcaster stuff as a warlock, it just all falls apart.
Yeah.
Right.
You're changing your warlock play style by building this way.
Yeah.
But you're creating a unique play style that might be viable.
Yeah, could work.
As we move on to the Bard, you're getting 2 charisma spellcasters. But what I will say is I was tempted to just throw an S out there right away, but then I remembered that the S actually is more so for the Bard build taking a few levels of Warlock.
Yeah.
But in this case, we're going Warlock with a few levels of Bard. Does a few levels of Bard get us enough to make this great?
You're absolutely right. A Swords Bard loves taking 1 level of Hexblade Warlock. And in fact, taking 1 or 2 levels of Warlock with almost any Bard is great. To get Eldritch Blast, to get you a little bit of a damage spell, and then you just go the rest of the way with your Bard levels. But when we reverse it, when we take only a couple levels of Bard and go the rest Warlock, we don't get that much. 1 level of Bard, a Bard is not a great dip. No. It's very hard to take just 1 level of Bard and get anything of value out of that, aside from a couple skill proficiencies and a few extra spell slots. So really with the Bard, we have to take either 3 levels to get a subclass feature from one of the Bard subclasses. We take 5 levels because 5 levels of Bard is the point where you're getting your Bardic inspirations coming back on a short rest. Until then, they only come back on a long rest. Or 6 levels, which is where you get your second Bard subclass feature. So that's a pretty hefty commitment from the Warlock, especially when the spell slots don't stack. Because if we're a Bard 6, Warlock 6, we're a 12th level character that only has 3rd level spell slots tops. And so we have to weigh that against, well, if you were a full-on Bard, you would have 6th level spell slots. And if you were a full-on Warlock, you would also have your Mystic Arcanum. And you could be a level 12, you could be a level 11 Bard with 1 level of Warlock and still get that.
So you're already losing points because this is a character that you're probably building this multi-class only for a one-shot between 12th and 20th level. Otherwise, it's not working very well. But there are some cool ideas here. One thing that I love with the Warlock, and Joe in our game plays this really well with his Warlock, is the Master of Disguise. And I think 3 levels of like reaching Eloquence Bard.
Okay.
Eloquence Bard gives you that you automatically roll a 10 on your persuasion and I believe deception checks.
Yep.
So that paired with Mask of Many Faces is a pretty cool social. It might bolster your social abilities.
And if I'm being honest, a Swords Bard 6 with 6 levels of Hexblade Warlock isn't a bad character by any stretch of the imagination. You've got lots of spell slots, lots of abilities. You've got more Warlock invocations than you would have otherwise had if you dipped. And one of the other interesting things that you can do with that build is you can go into you can go into more weapon options. You can have more Warlock choices there at the cost of higher level Bard spells. It evens out, and I think it's still a very strong character. Just, I think that you've given up a little bit for that, and I'm not sure if the trade-off is worth it.
Yeah.
Right?
Thematically, there's some really cool concepts, though, here. You could have glamour and fae. So, I mean, you're David Bowie.
Yep.
Undying pairs really well with, thematically with spirits.
Yes. I also think a College of Creation Bard paired with a Genie Warlock is kind of like create anything. Conceptually. But the thing that holds this back is the question of what is the balance between the levels that you take?
I actually, because this build takes so long to come online, I think it's a B.
Yeah.
There's some decent builds here.
1 level dip does get you the Bardic Inspiration. It gets you're going to have your Charisma maxed out. So it's not terrible.
No.
It isn't bad. It isn't bad at all. But I think that with the Bard, for me, I give it a B+.
Okay.
B+. It could be an A, but the reverse...
The reverse is S.
The reverse is S. But it is one of those builds where the more Warlock levels you have to take, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does, it gives us more spells as a Warlock. It does add minor improvements to the Warlock, but at what cost is the real question. Yeah. How far do you have to go to really make it come online and work?
Yeah. The Cleric, I think, suffers from a similar problem, only worse, because now we want to have wisdom to support the spell casting.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, a 1-level Cleric dip has a lot of options, and a 2-level Cleric dip gives us access to a bunch of Channel Divinity powers. There's some weird things that we could do here too, conceptually, by pairing the Domain with our Warlock Pact. And this is also the one where you have to ask that question of, like, what's going on here? Like, okay, you're a Cleric of a god. Maybe your god is, like, an Elder Elemental god. But the Cleric domains don't often represent these kind of elder fiend, like these elder fiends or eldritch entities anymore, because I think they've separated that design space. But I guess nature and fae, that works.
I mean, I will say a lot of fiends like to pose themselves as gods. They could have tricked you into swearing or into worshiping them, and you don't realize that you have inherited the powers of a fiend. We also have the Tempest Domain Cleric and the Fathomless Warlock, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and I guess the low-hanging fruit is the Celestial Warlock.
Right.
So you could simply be... The Celestial Warlock could mean that you made a pact to an angel or a servant of your god, and so that's kind of like the divine chain of command, as it were.
One thing that you can do with clerics, though, is gain access then to spells like Spiritual Weapon and Spirit Guardians.
Yep.
I have seen in play a Warlock that has Spirit Guardians and uses their Eldritch Blast with Grasp of Hadar to pull enemies into the Spirit
cool.
Guardians.
Okay.
Really cool.
It's tough to pull that off because you need wisdom and charisma to pull that off. So that's a little bit of a tough call. And also, comparing to the Sorcerer, you could have been a Divine Soul Sorcerer to get all of that with the Warlock with charisma.
Way better.
Right? However, I think a thing that could be cool is Clerics have Aura Vitality on their spell list now. It's a 3rd level spell, but Warlock spell slots come back on a short rest. The Life Domain adds to the amount of healing of Aura Vitality. So if you were a 5th level Cleric with Aura Vitality and a 5th level Warlock, and you're a Life Domain Cleric, and you cast Aura Vitality using one of your Warlock spell slots, or both of them, because they're both 2 3rd level slots, you're doing 40 d8 plus 100 points of healing over 2 minutes, spread out across your party members, and then you can take a 1 hour short rest, get those spell slots back, and do it again. It's a lot of healing. I feel like it's overkill.
I mean, it might be overkill, and also, like, even though that's really awesome, it is still relatively situational on when you're going to need that much healing. But I guess if you do, you do.
Yeah.
And you got it.
You got it.
But then you're kind of like, you've built
it's out of combat healing, too.
Yeah, and you've built this character just to be like, anybody need severe healing? I'm like a trauma center. I can deal with intense damage to you, but like that's what you're there for. You're a medic.
You could just take like the War Domain or the Tempest Domain, like 1 level of Cleric, to just scoop heavy armor proficiency as a Hexblade.
Yeah. That the 1 level dip to grab heavy armor on a Hexblade might be worthy of a B. This feels like it's either a B- or a C.
I think the Cleric dip is always good. I'm more comfortable giving it a B.
Okay.
I think it's the B- to the B+ of the Bard.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Druid, on the other hand, conceptually, a Druid Warlock, the most immediate thing that comes to mind is an Elven Druid sworn to a Archfey patron.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that there's a cool concept here of like a circle of Druids that are sworn to like Oberon or Titania, and they are the guardians of the edge of the Feywild, and they're using their abilities in that cool way.
Yeah, I think that you could go, like, the Fey Pact is the most obvious one. The Wildfire could go with something like Fiend. I don't know what you're really doing there, burning
Could
the
be
world.
Druid, Elemental Spirit. Druid with the Genie, Elemental Spirit, could work.
Dreams and Celestial.
Dreams and Celestial. So the Dreams Druid and the Celestial Warlock have their healing powers that they get right away, and these are actually almost the same. Except the Druid's one is 120-foot range, double the range, and gives temporary hit points. But by multiclassing, you would have the same number of this ability effectively as if you were single class.
Interesting.
Which is kind of cool.
Spores Hexblade. Now, the thing is...
Okay, Spores Hexblade could work.
You're going to get your Halo of Spores. Your temp HP is probably going to go away pretty quick. But
you'll still get that extra necrotic damage on a couple attacks, hopefully.
Yeah.
Another one that just strikes me as like, oh, I wish this worked better than it probably does, would be Great Old One and Stars.
Yeah.
Well, there's kind of that the constellation thing lets you send out guiding bolts, and there's the Archer constellation that could be interesting here. I just don't think they mesh.
No.
Right? Like mechanically, they just don't. Conceptually, there's groundwork here. It's just that the mechanics don't perfectly line up.
I think that this whole Druid Warlock idea, we're trying to find the thing in here that works, and like we actually, I'd say there are a couple possible builds that might not fall apart completely at the table, but it seems pretty weak.
Is it a C or is it a D?
It might be a D.
I have a small modicum of hope But I just, I don't know why you would do it.
I like, there are some potentially cool things, but I actually think that if you build the potentially cool things here, you're playing an inadequate character.
Sad. What about the fighter?
Well, the thing with fighters is taking 2 levels of fighter is always a good move. It's always one of the best moves. And taking 2 levels of fighter on a Hexblade is really, really good.
I agree.
You're going to get your fighting style. You're going to get your second wind and your action surge. But also, on any other Warlock, action surge is going to let you cast Eldritch Blast again.
Right. Or another spell. Because it's not subject to that bonus action restriction. Right? So, yeah. As a fighter, Warlock, you could Hex, Eldritch Blast, Action Surge, Eldritch Blast.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty explosive turn. And you only need 2 levels of fighter. If you took your fighter level first, you're also going to give yourself heavy armor and constitution saving throw proficiency. You got second wind. The fighting style could be relevant as well for the Hexblade. You know what doesn't work? Archery fighting style is a bonus for Eldritch Blast.
You could take blind fighting.
Yep.
You could take protection.
Just to get the extra AC.
Yeah, there's fighting styles that don't rely on, hey, I'm a fighter. Like, you could take the ones that benefit you more as a blaster.
I think that the 2 levels of fighter is a pretty easy sell.
Yeah.
It fits into a lot of things. I think that it's an A for almost any Hexblade. I think that maybe it's less good for more traditional but Action Surge is just always that good.
I think it's A overall because it actually the 2 level dip could apply to everybody. If you wanted to go more than 2 levels, only on the Hexblade, I would say. Like, you could be a Battle Master Hexblade.
You could.
And that's
you could be
cool.
an Echo Knight Hexblade.
Yeah.
You could be a Psionic Warrior
like, really,
Hexblade.
If you go 3 or 5 levels, whatever you want, and then the rest Hexblade.
Is there anything to being an Eldritch Knight with more levels of Warlock? Like, double down on the Eldritchness. Like, not be a Hexblade, but be an Eldritch Knight fighter with Pact of the Blade. Like, do a similar thing to the Barbarian.
I probably, that sounds awesome.
It's actually probably not bad. Because, you could then use the Warlock spell slots. Because the other interesting thing here with the fighter levels is that you could take a couple more fighter levels with the Pact of the Blade, with some more Warlock levels. Fighters are a short rest-based class, and so are Warlocks. So your Warlock spell slots are always coming back to you on a short rest, which you can use to fuel various things. You could channel them into Eldritch Smites. Again, it doesn't matter. The temporary hit thing from the Fiend Pact Warlock works for you, too.
Yeah.
And the fighter actually kind of likes that. The fighter doesn't mind casting Armor of Agathis on themselves, either.
No.
And here's a place where you could actually be a dexterity-based fighter. Instead, you could go with the Pact Bow. You could do the improved Pact Weapon, so your Pact Weapon can be a bow, be a dexterity-based fighter with Sharpshooter. This is a better way to make
the Arcane Archer.
This is a better Arcane Archer.
I think that this is a good A.
Yeah.
For everybody. There's a lot of
I
options.
really like the hacked Arcane Archer idea. That would be cool.
When we come to the Monk, this is actually where it starts to get mildly cluttered with our ability scores.
Yeah.
Because the Monk does want us to have Dexterity and Wisdom, whereas the Warlock is going to demand Charisma. So that's 3 ability scores that we need at least 13, which isn't insurmountable, but it is something to keep in mind.
Okay, but let's do the same exercise that we did with the Barbarian and the Fighter. What if we don't play the Hexblade?
But we take Pact of the Blade.
But we take the Pact of the Blade, and we go with the Monk's primary stats, and we just let the Charisma sit at 13.
And we play a Mercy Celestial.
That's cool. I could do that. Or you could be a Kensai, because then you have more options for your Pact Weapon.
Yeah.
your packed weapon at the end of the day, it could be a monk weapon because it could be a short sword. So you're still going to be able to attack with that, stack up all those invocations there. You can still use your warlock spell slots to support what you want to do as a monk. You could be a shadow monk.
I mean, shadow monk's awesome on anything.
You could be an elemental monk with the genie warlock.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
Does that make the 4 elements monk better?
No, but it's cool conceptually.
A drunken master archfey.
Oh, I like that.
You're in the woods getting
drunk
with
the satyrs.
With the satyrs.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. Okay, so you're gonna go in.
You're a dex-based build.
Yeah, so you're a dexterity-based build. You're gonna go in with your packed weapon. You're gonna cast Hex. Because you're gonna be able to get the extra damage from Hex on all your unarmed attacks. You're gonna have those spell slots that you can use for like the key augmentations and the non-combat things that you want.
How many levels of monk do you think we're taking?
The monk drops off so much that going monk 5, warlock 5 is probably stronger than straight up monk 10.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's better than
warlock 10.
Warlock 10.
And that's the tricky. I think that I agree with you on that statement, which is why I think this is a C, because I actually think there are some fun builds here. There's some fun, crazy, weird...
Yeah, there's something really zany about this, and just the combinations of the monastic traditions and the different packs is kind of fun to think about.
Long Death Undead.
Yeah. Sun Soul Celestial.
Sun Soul Celestial.
Yeah. Actually, I think the Mercy Celestial is really cool. Great Old One, Astral Self.
Yeah.
There's enough cool here.
C for cool.
C for cool. Yep,
cool.
That's the way that it works.
Let's move on to the Paladin. Here, we're going to need strength, but we already have charisma.
Yeah, I have played Paladin 6, Warlock 10. I played it in D&D Adventures League. That character was one of the strongest characters I've ever played in D&D.
We've literally made a dedicated video about this character. Now,
that was my edgelord, emo kid, Hexblade, Vengeance Paladin that like had the hair swipe and the black armor and everything.
Me in high school.
Yeah, pretty much. I loved that character. It was it was a super broken character, especially because that Adventures League character had a staff of power. So I could toss down wall of I did this thing where I was a Hexblade. I wall of forced an enemy I did the cage match thing myself. Right. Yeah, it was really good. And you buffed all the saving throws. You're using charisma for all your spell casting and for the attacking and for the saving. You have amazing saving throws. You have amazing attacks. You have amazing damage. It's basically the emo main character syndrome. This build. This build is S tier. It's in the upper echelons of the most powerful characters in the game.
What if we don't do Hexblade?
That's the question.
So, okay, you've opened my eyes to the concept of just Pact of the Blade, because Pact of the Blade still gives you all the cool invocations that require Pact of the Blade. We can still be a Pact of the Blade warlock, smiting.
Well, even 2 levels of Paladin means that you can use those smites and you can turn your warlock spell slots into smites.
Yeah.
So even a 2-level Paladin dip is good. Obviously, taking the Paladin levels is bringing... I do feel that no matter what you're going to do here, you're going to go Paladin with melee in some way, shape, or form. So you're going to grab the Pact of the Blade. You don't have to be a Hexblade, but if you do that, you have to have a more traditional Paladin ability score spread where you have strength, constitution, and charisma kind of balanced out rather than going all in on charisma. That's what makes the Hexblade thing so powerful, is that you just get to go all in on charisma and ignore your strength. It's not bad to do the strength thing.
Yeah.
And it does mean that if you don't go Hexblade, you can pick a different Warlock Pact and combine things in more interesting ways.
Like an Oathbreaker who's sworn their pact to the devil and is now a fiend.
Yeah, classic, right? Or you could be, not to go evil with it, you could be an Oath of the Ancients Archfey.
Yeah.
You could be a Redemption Celestial. And again, the Redemption Celestial, it makes sense. You are a paladin, you swore your oath before an angel, you made a pact to the angel, and you are serving the cause of good. You don't even have to stretch the metaphor.
I'm gonna go Spawn style here.
Okay.
And you're a great old one, Watchers. You gain your powers from an entity, but you also do not want that entity to show up.
Right. So, okay, you're the Watchers. So, what if you're an order of paladins that in generations past, the paladins actually shackled an eldritch entity, and they siphon power from that. That's the dark secret, right?
Yeah.
Is that the paladin order is actually taking the power of this eldritch entity, because the reason why the paladins are taking the power from the eldritch entity is that over time, that is what will destroy the eldritch entity. If every by robbing it of its power through the pact, eventually they will weaken it and destroy it.
And they are the Watchers, making sure that no other entities enter
Yes,
the realm.
because it's still trying to escape.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That is a cool campaign idea.
Yeah. Even though, okay, we have the S plus tier option.
Yes.
But is it an S overall? Because I still think there's potential in all of the options.
I think the Paladin with the Pact of the Blade and any kind of combination of Paladin, Oath / Warlock Patron, I think those are soundly A tier. I think that the Hexblade is S tier, and it's so S tier that it bumps it up, because the Hexblade works with any Paladin Oath. It's S.
Yeah, I'll give it the S.
It's the best.
It is your best option, I think. One of the best options.
The Ranger has the same ability score problem as the Monk.
And I actually think with the Ranger, you're getting less than the Monk. I think that in a weird way, like, we could go, again, Pact of the Blade, Ranger. But Rangers, I mean, okay, so you're going to gain some spellcasting.
Okay. We could also go with the Pact Bow. So we talked about the Fighter being the Archer. So we could do the same thing here.
Yeah.
Improve Pact Weapon, get the Pact Bow, Eldritch Smite on the spell slots, knock people prone. That's not a bad little pickup. Multiclassing out of Ranger after 5 levels also isn't bad. I think that maybe Warlock 5, Ranger 5 might be stronger than Ranger 10 if you build it as an Archer.
Yeah, if you build it as an Archer and you're taking but again, we're limiting ourselves to Hexblade or Pact of the Blade.
Pact of the Blade, we don't have to be a Hexblade.
Right.
So we could go Fae and get the Misty Escape thing.
Swarmkeeper Fae.
Swarmkeeper Fae. Yeah, Swarm of Fairies. Okay, so we got a concept.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or Swarm of Pixies.
Yeah, so you could go Swarmkeeper Fae Pact, or you could go Beastmaster Fae Pact.
Have like
Yeah.
a cool Fae beast.
The Swarmkeeper has the cool push-pull stuff too with it, right? So you're using that instead of Eldritch Blast, but you could still do your things like putting down Hunger of Hadar to push people into.
Yeah.
You've got your choice of whether do you want to Hex or Hunter's Mark things. You can use Summon Beast, upcast it through the Warlock spell slots.
Yeah.
And Warlocks do get a couple good summons too.
You could also, I mean, flavor. If we reflavor a little bit.
Okay.
What if your dragon riding ranger, the dragon is actually a demon and you're a fiend pact warlock?
Okay. Aside, I don't understand why there isn't a dragon patron warlock.
Me neither. That's a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
It always has been. We have dragon everything. It's Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I know. But, okay, I thought this was going to be a flat-out D. But after the conversation of the weird backwards hacked Arcane Archer with the Fighter, I feel like you could make a hacked Arcane Archer here, and it's kind of not terrible.
I feel like it's C. Like, I don't feel like there's a lot of options here.
Okay.
Or is it better than a C? Because, I mean, we did talk about quite a few options.
I mean, the Ranger is pretty front-loaded as a class, and 5 levels of Ranger kind of gives you everything you want, and it gives you a fighting style.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you can do the Pact Bow thing, and then you can go. I think it's not as strong as doing other things, but it's kind of weird and interesting. And then you can use those Ranger spell slots to cast Warlock spells. And you can grab some utility spells. And then you don't need to take your wisdom over 13. You're not going to take your charisma very high either, because the focus here is that you're still being a dexterity-based character.
Yeah.
It's kind of witchery too.
Yeah, it is.
Is this? I thought going into this, I thought this was a flat-out D, but I don't feel it is.
I think I also thought we were going into this one with D, but I raised it to C, but I'm starting to feel like maybe it's a B.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a B.
I want to see a whole bunch of Barbarian Warlocks, Fighter Warlocks, and Ranger Warlocks now.
I'm interested to see what that looks like.
The Warlock is surprising me. I feel like maybe the looming shadow of the Charisma build and the Hexblade, and that single-minded focus that you have to use the single ability score.
Also, the single-minded focus that you have to be an Eldritch Blaster if you're not a Hexblade.
Yeah.
But that's not true.
No.
And you can actually gain invocations, unique abilities, and all of that from a Warlock who's benefiting from melee combat by taking Pact of the Blade and pairing it with another class.
The thing that I worry is that the getting to that point is rough.
Probably.
Because I do think that the Ranger, like, taking the Ranger levels is a little bit touch and go.
Yeah.
And you get to a point really quick where you're like, maybe I should have just taken more Warlock levels. So that's why it's a B.
Yeah.
Because you gotta build it pretty carefully.
As we move on to the Rogue, the first thing that stands out to me with the Rogue is that you cannot sneak attack with Eldritch Blast, which is disappointing. But again, my eyes are open in this episode to Pact of the Blade.
Dexterity. So a Rogue on paper doesn't mind having Charisma.
Yeah.
And a Bard and a Rogue on paper doesn't mind having Charisma, and a Warlock on paper doesn't mind having Dexterity. So again, the Pact of the Blade as a Warlock, but any Patron, any Rogue. Hexblade Swashbuckler.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, but go with me on this. What if you were a Phantom Undead Pact or an Arcane Trickster Archfey? We know that we can do the same thing as before, is we can go Dexterity, go Pact of the Blade, get the invocations for extra attack.
Mm-hmm. Which rogues want.
Yes.
Desperately.
The Eldritch Smite knocks them prone. The sneak attack is extra damage.
We're also, if we take the Life Drinker, we are adding our Charisma to our attacks as well.
We're getting Expertise. We're getting Stealth.
We're getting Cunning Action.
Yep. This isn't bad. Like, I feel there's a build here.
There's a few builds here.
Yeah.
Barring the Paladin, who's our S tier, out of the other options where we're talking about this weird Pact of the Blade melee or ranged build, the Fighter comes out on top out of those because of Action Surge. Rogue gives us sneak attack and some cool extra skills and abilities, but I don't think they're as strong as the Fighter.
Can you be a Soul Blade and make your psionic daggers your pact weapon? I don't think you can.
I don't think so, because I think you're like conjuring fake knives. That's the Soul Blade.
Right, because they're just like temporary manifestations. They're not like an actual weapon.
Yeah, and I think the Pact of the Hexblade requires you to like turn a weapon into your pact.
Because I like the idea of a Soul Knife Great Old One.
I mean, it sounds cool.
Yeah.
I think this is B.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that a Rogue 5, Warlock 5 is actually a totally playable character.
I'm actually very surprised in this episode. There's a lot of things that I thought we were going to just tank to D, but this whole Pact of the Blade, what do you get, is actually a really cool way of bridging martial characters and any Warlock.
Yep.
Moving on to the Sorcerer, though. Now we don't need to worry about the martial weirdness of Pact of the Blade. The Sorcerer, we take a few levels of Sorcerer and you're just getting Warlock spellcasting with meta magic and more spell slots, and yay.
This is S tier, right?
This is S tier. Like, how do you go wrong with Quicken Spell, Twin Spell, Subtle Spell on a Warlock? You don't.
I feel like you are doubling down on Eldritch Blast with this character, but that's not a bad thing.
No. I think that your ability to quicken a spell and Eldritch Blast somebody on the same turn,
Yeah.
we talked about doing that with Action Surge, but you can do this more with a Sorcerer.
Totally. But to be devil's advocate, I think the build that takes 1 to 3 levels of Warlock and goes the rest Sorcerer
Is better, yeah.
is better than
You're right.
than just dipping. But there's still interesting things, because I'm pretty sure you can convert Warlock spell slots to sorcery points. And so you can just take a couple Sorcerer levels, go Warlock the rest of the way, and you've got all, like, you can turn your Warlock slots into metamagic, and you can take the metamagic adept feat along the way to get more metamagics, and then you've got Quicken Spell. I think that twinning a spell that you're casting using a Warlock spell slot is a great way to get more mileage out of those limited spell slots. I think Warlocks love Subtle Spell. I think they love Empowered Spell. I think they love everything about metamagic.
And you're both Charisma.
Yeah. Yep.
You can play. There's a lot of room to play here.
What subclasses could you pair together?
So, right away, if we do take a few levels of Sorcerer, I think the Shadow Sorcerer feels really cool, but also the Aberrant Mind, great old one.
Aberrant Mind, great old one.
Like,
Yep.
it's all there. I don't know what we would pair the Clockwork Soul with. The Clockwork Soul,
I guess the closest match, again, this is coming back to the Artificer, like, where is, like, the machine patron?
and where's the Dragon Patron? Because
Yeah.
we have the Dragon.
Yeah. It shows the gaps. But you could be a Divine Soul Sorcerer
Yeah.
combined with a Celestial Warlock.
I also feel like for some reason, the Wild Magic feels like Archfey.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
it does. Yeah.
So there's some conceptually interesting ideas here.
Yeah.
Metamagic feels great on a Warlock, and I actually do think some of the features, like when I said Shadow Sorcerer, I mean, getting the ability to not need to take the invocation for Devil's Sight to be able to cast darkness and see in it is pretty cool. If you go high enough with Shadow Sorcerer, I mean, we all like a hound that causes our enemies to have worse saving throws.
Yeah. Yep. And I think the Hexblade also gives you a spirit that you can summon. So you could have the Hound and the Spirit, which would be a weird build, but could be viable. There's so many different ways that you could build the Warlock Sorcerer that it's really hard to fully capture in this very brief discussion all the combinations that exist, because all of them are good.
Yeah, we could do an entire video
Yeah.
about the Sorlock, which we probably should
Yeah.
at some point.
I think there's the classic Sorlock is taking like a 1 to 2 or maybe 3 levels of Warlock and then going the rest Sorcerer.
Yeah.
But I want to point out that that's not the only way to play this character, depending on what your goals of the build are. And you don't have to be a Hexblade. You can be any patron. You can go any pact. You can go any sorcery type you want. And I do think that this is an example of where, yeah, you could take 5 levels of Sorcerer and 10 levels of Warlock and have a perfectly viable character out of that, despite the fact that you've given up your higher level spell slots to do it. Obviously, you have to have a very specific goal in mind with what you want to achieve with that character, but you end up with still a very strong character in the end. So there's so many combos here, we don't have time to mention them all, but I want to acknowledge that they exist. In the comments, you can tell us all the different ways that you can build a Sorcerer or Warlock.
I think that this is our S tier, though.
Yeah.
As we move on to the end of the list, the Wizard. I feel like the Wizard's whole thing is their spell list. They don't get a whole lot from a subclass choice. And really, there's not much here that I wouldn't rather take the Sorcerer to get meta magic and all of that.
There's a really obscure thing about going with a Necromancer Warlock to have a horde of undead.
Yeah, okay. I see where you're going. That sounds annoying at the table, but yeah. I do think so. One thing that I've noticed in the time that I played a Wizard was that the wizard also starts off as probably one of the weakest characters in the game. It ends as one of the strongest characters in the game. But for the first few levels, it's a bit of a struggle. So if we're taking just those first few levels of wizard, what are we really getting? A spell book?
Okay. Yes, it's weak. Do we want to try to combine the Blade Singer and the Hexblade?
I feel like we've talked about it. I don't feel like it's a perfect match. I feel like it's a clunky match. Maybe they'll get along, but they're like acquaintances, not best friends.
I feel like I want them to be separate characters rather than the same.
That's how I feel too.
I feel like there's this thing where you could do this huge loop of like grabbing Artificer levels and Hexblade. Like you could try to grab everything. It's like, I want the Paladin level, and I want the Blade Singer level, and I want the Hexblade level. And you try to grab all of the features that let you combine spellcasting with melee combat, and to do so you multi-class like a whole bunch of times. And the problem with that is that now you have to level that character up from level 1 or play it in a one shot, and it's kind of a mess. And you've the opportunity cost of all that is that you've given up higher level spell access.
We are getting more spell slots, but they're also int-based spell slots.
It's like a C- at best. If you've got your Hexblade Blade Singer build, or you've got your Warlock Necromancer build, I think that's the exception that proves the rule.
And for those exceptions, I'll give it a C, but it's a pretty low C. Now that we've looked at all that, let's take a look at what our community thought. The community all voted on their top 3 picks for multi-classes for the Warlock. The Sorcerer and the Paladin were pretty close to each other, with 84.6% for Sorcerer and 76.3% for Paladin. That means that the Sorcerer pulled out as the top choice for Warlock multiclass. I agree with that. Paladin, very close second. I agree with that.
I think the community's choice to rank the Sorcerer over the Paladin is a very apt one, because the Warlock is overall a spellcaster, whereas the Paladin does pull the Warlock to the melee build that is promoted really only by the Blade Pact and the Hexblade. So if you look at the Sorcerer, there's more viable combos than I think. As soon as you go Paladin, the power is high, but the number of combos begins to shrink.
I think with everything that we said in the video, it makes sense that the Bard, of course, comes in third with 46.5%. Fourth place goes to staying a single class Warlock, which does kind of make sense, because when we talked about our weird Barbarian build, our weird Fighter build, our weird Ranger and Rogue build, our weird Artificer build, like those all were kind of B ranking. The Fighter does notably get 22.1%, which isn't too far behind staying a single class Warlock. So I think the Warlock Fighter is viable because people are like, hey, what about Action Surge? Everything else kind of falls pretty low. What I will say about it falling pretty low is, again, we ask our community to pick the top 3. Although you and I were able to find a cool build that involves like, hey, what if we do this Pact of the Blade Barbarian? Nobody's picking that as their top 3 choices.
No, and I think in all the cases where we kind of got creative and weird with this episode, I think that the question always looming over it is straight Warlock 10 still just better?
And a lot of times, probably. We offered some really unique, viable builds.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with what the community's said here. Druid gets the lowest. Monk gets pretty down there as well. Ranger also low. I think I agree with the Druid. There's not much you can do there.
Yeah.
With the Monk and Ranger, I think we opted for some unique options, but I still think they deserve to be pretty low.
Yeah. Once again, if you are looking for a great counterpoint to some of the combinations in these videos, you should definitely check out our friend Colby over at D4 Deep Dive. He's made a lot of videos inspired by these episodes and has often taken some of the more off-the-wall concepts that we presented, or in many cases looked at combinations that flew completely under our radar. So, Colby, we love you out there. Tell us what works.
Yeah, I want to see some Pact of the Blade builds from you, Colby. So that's your next challenge. And also, if you've played any of these wild or weird build combinations for the Warlock, I would love to hear about them in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible with the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy what we do here on YouTube, please be sure to become a patron of the channel. Follow the links in below for how.
And if you want to see a straight Warlock in play, you can check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more tier ranking videos right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.